Good morning, everyone from San Francisco. Some of you it may not be morning for. My name is Cindy Cohn, and I am the executive director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I'm going to be your host for today's discussion. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Before proceeding, we have a few housekeeping things I want to go over with you. First, we are going to be recording this session, but only the video of our speakers will be included. So if we reach a question of yours, the audience won't be included. Please join us now in the official chat via Twitch at eff.org/livestream. In the chat, you can drop in your questions throughout the programs, and our guests will answer as many of them as we can at the end. And if you're comfortable, please type in a hello in the chat window. Let us know what part of the world you're chiming in from, because this is really supposed to be a town hall. We'd like to encourage as much, cross communication as well as the information we're going to provide for you. Now, I'm hopeful there's some people here who are meeting EFF for the first time. If you are, the Electronic Frontier Foundation is a nonprofit whose technologists, activists, and attorneys have been fighting for your online privacy and free speech since 1990. That's right, we are older than the World Wide Web. You are the reason that EFF can take on this important work. We are member supported. If you'd like to help us in the fight to defend your digital freedoms, please consider donating to us at eff.org/stopice, and you can pick up a cool bit of EFF's merchandise at shop.eff.org. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and you're the giants who are going to help us continue to stay strong and do this work. So we're here today because, like many of you, we have been both heartbroken and incensed by the recent violence by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection, ICE and CBP. Dangerously unchecked surveillance and rights violations have been a through line for the Department of Homeland Security since the agency's creation in the wake of the September 11th attacks. And now we find ICE and CPB repeatedly refusing to exercise or submit to the democratic accountability required by the Constitution and our systems of laws. We called today's town hall so that we can discuss ways that we can stay safer, how the digital rights community can help address the brutality against other communities, including immigrant communities, and those involved in holding the immigration enforcement actions accountable. I know many people here are in the digital rights in technology communities. We're hopeful to talk through some of the technologies that are being used, as well as some of the ways that we can band together to try to push back and hold the line our constitutional rights. With that, I want to welcome our speakers. First, Senior Staff Attorney Saira Hussain. Second, security and privacy activist Thorin Klosowski, and Senior Staff Technologist William Budington. So we have a star-studded group here representing the kind of three areas that EFF focuses its work: law, technology, and activism. We're going to save about 15 minutes at the end for questions, but go ahead and put them in the chat now, and we'll start to collect them so we have them ready. So I want to give a quick introduction. Thank you, everybody, again for coming and joining us. I hope this will be an important hour to kind of talk through, what we know. I want to kind of talk a little bit about how we got here. EFF, as I mentioned, was formed in 1990 with the idea that, when you go online, your rights should go with you. And we have long been concerned about the ability of technologies to, both support our rights. But I think right now what we're seeing is a way in which surveillance technologies especially are being used to shrink or minimize our rights. So in some ways, while this is a sad development for us, this is ICE and CBP doing some of the things that we've been warning about literally for 35 years of this organization. We have seen a continued development and deployment of surveillance equipment against people that are engaging in protest activity. We've seen as people's ability to monitor and create accountability through their devices, especially their phones, efforts to try to shut down the right to record the police and the right to observe law enforcement activity. We've seen a steady erosion of the constitutional rights, specifically the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment, in the context of this surveillance. And we've seen this both in the digital and the non-digital side. Most recently, I think people may have heard of an ICE memo and an oral briefing of agents that they can enter homes without a proper warrant. They may use the term warrant, but as lawyers know, sometimes that word means things that are much smaller than what we mean by a warrant, which has to do with what the Fourth Amendment requires. And that, critically, as Saira's going to explain, involves a judge and not an agency self-authorizing themselves. We've seen continuous violations of the Fourth Amendment in other ways as well, including surveillance technologies being used as something that the founders called a general warrant or a writ of assistance, which means that rather than getting individualized suspicion, they're using technologies to surveil a whole range of people and doing the targeting secondarily, if at all. So both the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment are under attack right now and they're both under attack in ways that EFF has long been concerned about and been active about. Our core constitutional values are at issue here, and that's exactly what EFF was formed to try to stand up against. With that background about kind of how we got here and how I think from our perspective, ICE and CBP have they have barged into an area that EFF has long been concerned about. I want to talk a little bit and start with the tech. Let's start with what surveillance technology is ICE using against communities, and what do we know? And we know that we don't know everything yet, but what do we know about how surveillance technologies are being actually deployed in some of the ICE actions that we're seeing against protesters and against people who they're targeting? Bill, can you walk through what we know?
Yeah, and thanks for that introduction, Cindy. We have information through procurement documents, through what we've observed. And I'm going to kind of start from the broad and then kind of go to more of the street level. Our colleague Cooper Quinton wrote a comprehensive piece on the contracts that ICE has with surveillance tech vendors. You can access that piece at eff.org/ice-shopping-spree. The contracts really run the gamut from social media surveillance and to location data broker sourced tools to data extraction tools. And I can talk about those subsequently. So in a $30 million contract with Palantir, ICE has access to a few tools. One is called Palantir Elite, which was covered by 404 Media recently, and kind of just Fortune kind of describes this tool that they're able to target an entire neighborhood for potential targets to raid, potential targets for that they think that might be have undocumented folks, and rank them with a percentage of like, what's the most salient target to conduct those raids. There's also Immigration OS developed by Palantir as well, targeted for CBP, and that is going to collate information on their side. It's not installed on your device, but it's information for them to gather immigration information at their disposal. So that's kind of the tools that they have on their side. And we have put pressure on Palantir to really cut ties with ICE at this point because of their unaccountability, their brutality, and their murderousness, frankly. So a little bit more focusing on the street level, there are a number of tools at ICE's disposal. One developed by CBP called Mobile Fortify that is attempting to assess the status. Without the consent of the person being filmed, by pointing a camera at their face and doing facial recognition in order to see what their immigration status is. And essentially this is troublingly actually used above and beyond any documentation that they might provide in paper. So it is sufficient for an arrest, for instance, or a detainment or ICE just to have the assessment of the Mobile Fortify facial recognition app. And we know that these technologies are flawed. We know that facial recognition technology isn't 100% accurate, but they're using it as the one-stop shop for assessing someone's citizenship. In addition to Mobile Fortify on the facial recognition access, we're seeing Clearview AI being used. And Clearview has a database of millions, I think 200 million images, which they will try to do facial recognition on a database of that ICE agents have threatened to add people to on the street. And
we're hearing increasingly that these technologies might be used not just in order to identify immigrants, and of course not all immigrants are people subject to formal orders to leave the country, but also that they have at least been telling people that they're using it to identify protesters and people who are observing the police. And I just wanted to kind of make sure that we broaden this. Now, the government has been unclear. Some parts of the government are saying, no, we're not doing this, while the people who are actually doing the filming of people in the street have told people, yes, we are. So this will be an area where we're going to continue to watch and push to try to get clarity. It's bad either way, but it's especially important for us to know the scope of what the government is who the government's trying to track and target.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as we've seen, they're targeting people filming and documenting these protests specifically with violence, directly. And that's an important point, that they're using these tools in order to identify those that are activists. And we've seen them, for instance, keeping lists of those that are documenting protests, those that are defending the rights of immigrants as well. Thank you for that. There's, in addition to the facial recognition technologies, there's also tools that use the surveillance economy, advertising economy to source information that's then put in a easy to access tool and into the hands of ICE agents. One is called WebBlock by Penlink. So Penlink develops WebBlock, and there's similar tools accessible to law enforcement. Babel Street is put in the hands of local police to gather information on people sourced from their devices, and often this it will include location information. So we know that for WebBlock, you can basically do a reverse geocoding, reverse. So you draw a line through a certain area, and you can see all the devices that were in that area at a specified time.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, and I just want to underscore it, that first of all, this data that's being collected about us by the surveillance economy, the commercial interests, the data brokers. This information is being made available to law enforcement and marshaled in these situations. And Weblock is only one of them that can do this kind of, again, when I mentioned they're doing mass surveillance first and sorting out who they need second, this kind of location mapping is the kind of thing that we're talking about, and the constitutional issues that comes with it. But it also really underscores that the idea that you don't worry about a private company tracking you, you only worry about the government tracking you, or vice versa, doesn't make a lot of sense when you start understanding how this is working. The data is flowing back and forth. The government is one of the, I think, if not the number one, close to the number one purchaser of commercial surveillance data. It's not just location data, but this is an ongoing thing that I really want people to recognize, that there is a concerted effort to try to convince you that there's a difference between the commercial surveillance systems and the government access to information. And it's really just not true from where we sit and where we're watching these tools like Weblock.
Yeah. Yeah. And the collation of all this information ready at the hand, for a price of pennies, makes it so that ICE and federal agencies can have access to this information very easly. So yeah, it's all part of this holistic nexus, as you kind of mentioned. And yeah, the last technology I wanted to bring up was automated license plate readers. So we haven't seen ICE using flock cameras directly, but they've requested information from law enforcement to get information on your license plate. So just to describe, an ALPR is, if you haven't heard, a system, a camera that is placed in a particular location or in a roving vehicle that can scan license plates as you're passing by. And this can be incredibly revealing to your daily patterns, where you sleep, where you work, etc. And so Flock is one of the major vendor of automated license plate reader data. So we haven't seen a direct contract between ICE and Flock, but what we have seen is Motorola, who bought Vigilant Solutions maybe a decade ago, being a source for ALPR data for ICE. And so we know that they're getting this information directly from Motorola. They're getting this information from law enforcement, who are then delivering it to ICE. So we have called on cities that are doing this to stop, to become in compliance with the law and stop this practice.
I just want to jump in over here because what we've seen here is when it comes to Flock, there's been reporting, including here in San Francisco, showing that state or local law enforcement agencies are running these queries for ICE, like the actual purpose will say ICE investigation. And so we have seen that. The other thing that we've seen, and this is a little bit less clear in terms of exactly what is going on, there's been recent reports, including in the city of Mountain View, which is in the South Bay Area, where there appeared to be some sort of issue with Flock's software that allowed federal agencies to access their cameras where they weren't supposed to be able to do so. There were 6 federal agencies that accessed them. We know that ICE was not one of them, but if these other agencies can access them, it's only a short leap before ICE can do the same. And so the fact is that if the only obstacle between ICE being able to access an ALPR camera or not is a checkbox, that probably isn't a secure system to be able to use. And then going back to Bill's point about, the competitor to Flock, which is, I think the largest competitor is Motorola Solutions Network, Vigilant Solutions. We actually filed a lawsuit back in 2021 around this very issue. So in California, law enforcement agencies are not allowed to share license plate reader data with out-of-state or federal agencies. This was kind of like one of the very, new concerns back in 2016, but luckily the legislature was prescient about it, realizing that when this data flows to other sources that you may not intend it to, they can do things that you wouldn't want. And now, in the wake of Roe v. Wade falling, in the post-Dobbs world, along with what we see here from ICE and CBP, it's good that we have this law on the books. And so we did sue to enforce it back in 2021. We sued the Marin County Sheriff because they were sharing with dozens of out-of-state and federal agencies, including portions of ICE and Customs and Border Protection. And we ended up reaching a settlement there. We know that the Attorney General's office is also in California is now enforcing the same statute against some recalcitrant law enforcement agencies. So hopefully good things come out of there. But there are certain laws on the books, and other states, people who are in other states or localities may want to think about, how can we think about all kinds of different solutions, including legislative solutions against automated license plate readers. And then one additional thing I wanted to add is that Customs and Border Protection also has their own automated license plate readers in the border region. So they have covert ALPRs that are often disguised as traffic barrels or cones. Our colleague Dave Moss actually has some really interesting pictures where he's been able to find these hidden ALPR cameras in the roadway. And so this is another source of license plate reader information that's flowing through. And there may be ways in which we can put pressure on state governments to stop collaborating with federal agencies in this way.
Yep. And if you want to, EFF hosts a thing called the Atlas of Surveillance, where we're tracking as much of the surveillance that we can find. So we're tracking the trackers. So if you want to see what we found in your area, you can actually look and see. But you're absolutely right. We focused first on the border, but we have stuff now all over the country. I wouldn't say it's comprehensive. It's a cat and mouse game to try to catch up with all the surveillance, but we do the best we can to try to give people a mapping of the technologies that we're seeing. Let's switch a bit. We're always we never have as much time as I want. I want to switch to Thorin for a second and talk a little bit about how, what work we're doing to try to help people know how they can protest and record the police and observe in ways that are safer, and what materials we put together.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of training. It's a lot of teaching. We run the Surveillance Self-Defense website, which is ssd.eff.org, which has a lot of resources to kind of learn about this stuff. And we're doing a lot of in-person trainings where we're teaching different communities what's going on and how to figure out what's going on in their communities and help them, as well as teaching other security trainers how to do this for themselves. And I think as a lot of this discussion has already highlighted, education is a really important part of this, because every city and every person is going to have a different sort of threat model that they're dealing with. And they're going to have to come up with a different security plan for how to manage that, whether they're going to a protest, whether they're filming ICE, whether they are just worried about interacting with any of these officers. There's kind of a series of things you have to go through and think through. So what we're doing now is a lot of education around that and kind of helping people kind of tamp down on a lot of the rumor mill that's happening, because as this is going on, there is as many rumors as there are kind of facts, and helping people really navigate that and decide what threats are real is a very important part of what we're doing right now, I think.
Yep, I think that's right. And that's ssd.eff.org. Am I right about that?
Yep.
Let's talk about the right to record a little bit. Saira, we've seen all of these viral videos of ICE agents telling observers that they're not allowed to film them, or even taking their cameras away, or otherwise attacking them. So let's lay it down here. Are you allowed to record ICE?
So EFF has done an extensive amount of work in the area of the right to record law enforcement. We filed amicus briefs with many different federal courts of appeal on this very issue, because whether or not you're allowed to film the police or any law enforcement is a fundamental First Amendment question, right? And the courts have come down pretty unequivocally on this. You have the right to record law enforcement, including ICE, when they are engaged in carrying out their official duties in public. So that means if an ICE agent is carrying out their duties, arresting people, talking to people, basically in the course of their duties, doing whatever, that is, you have the right to record them. That right also extends to when there's something happening, maybe not in public, but in somebody's home, where the person who's recording has the legal right to be. So for instance, if ICE is in your home carrying out some sort of enforcement activity, you have the right to record them in your home. It's really important to sort of understand right now, I think one of the major issues that we're currently seeing is that there is this right to record. It's, across the country, you have this right. And yet ICE and CBP are often retaliating against those who are exercising this right through intimidation and use of force. And so whether you decide to engage in the right to record or not, that really may depend on your threat modeling. It really may depend on like what your individual circumstances are. If you're somebody, who maybe has documentation, citizenship, that may be protecting you a little bit more when it comes to being able to record. If you're not the target of if you may not end up being in the crosshairs of ICE as a target, that may be one of the reasons, for which you'd want to engage in this. But I just want to really fundamentally highlight right now that we are in a moment that's kind of unprecedented in terms of the use of force that we're seeing against people who are observing, bystanding, recording. And so the courage that's being displayed in Minnesota and in other places around the country for around people who are continuing to document and expose these abuses is just I think it's like the fundamental exercise of constitutional rights, and yet it is so clearly trying to be suppressed right now by the government.
Yep. So what kind of precautions are we suggesting to people if they want to record ICE? Obviously, there's an initial question about whether you should take your phone at all to a protest. And depending on, we keep using this term threat modeling, which is it's kind of a security community term. But what it really means is that, it's not a one size fits all question. You have to decide what kind of risks you're willing to take, not only for you, but for your loved ones. And many people have, even if, they might have documentation, they have people in their families or that they love who do not, or who live with them. So part of what SSD does, and Thorin is really the keeper of all of this information, is help you make your own analysis of what kind of threats are facing you and what kind of risks you want to do. So let's say you've made the first decision. You want to take your phone to a protest with you because you might want to record ICE. You see something happening. You're thinking you want to record it. What precautions should you take? And I'm going to start with Saira with this, but then there might be some technical stuff from Thorin and Bill as well.
Yeah. So, either in the protest context where you're taking your phone in order to record what's going on, or, as we've seen many of the videos in Minnesota, these were people who the protest, like they didn't go to the protest. The ICE activity came to them. It was in their neighborhood, right? They took out their phones to be like, I want to know what's going on and I want to show what's happening to my neighbors. And so some of the things that we say are, do not interfere with law enforcement. If they're carrying out an enforcement action, you don't want to put yourself in the middle of that, because that only gives them the fuel to try and do something in response. To stay calm, to put some distance between you and the scene. There's no particular distance that you need to have, but in general, like if they don't have to walk towards you to tell you to back up, then maybe that is something to consider. You may also want to consider the sensitive nature of the content. And so if there's a run-of-the-mill sort of like arrest happening in front of you, and you're trying to document it just to make sure you have something, If it's not something that you want to live stream necessarily, you may want to consider asking for consent from the person who's being arrested, their loved ones or family members who are on the scene, maybe blurring out faces. As Cindy mentioned, the person who's the target of the ICE enforcement activity may have other people in their family that are mixed status, undocumented. And so you don't want to create ICE's next target for them by, recording and then uploading automatically if it's not something that's urgent. And of course, recognizing that you may not always understand when it's urgent or not. In some of the situations, like, in the horrific murders that we saw in Minnesota, the live streaming aspect of it is really what was able to expose and counter the narratives of the government about who was involved in violence and who wasn't. So law enforcement can ask you to step back for public safety purposes, but they cannot order you to move because you are recording. If law enforcement decides to take your device, so if ICE decides, we're going to grab your device, under the Fourth Amendment, they need a warrant to be able to search that device. And if they ask you to delete content, you can refuse to do so. You can also refuse to give your passcode or otherwise unlock your device. So those are your rights. And again, it's an evolving situation on the ground. What we've seen in terms of what your rights are not always being respected, and so a lot of it is going to be left to individual judgment to determine, like, how can I safely exercise my right to record within these parameters.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important point. Like the gamut of different, like, whether you want to bring your phone to a protest, whether you want to, or just bring a phone to record, at an incident that might be happening outside of your residence or whatever the case may be. There's a number of distinct kind of ways in which you can document or participate in a protest, right? And then the first one might be, do I want to bring that device with me at all? If I bring that device with me, then if it's seized, then it might be subject to a forensic extraction. And so there are tools at ICE's disposal and law enforcement in general's disposal, like the Gray Key by Magnet Forensics and the UFED, the Universal Forensic Extraction Device by Celebrite. And these are two devices that require physical access to your device, right? Your smart device, your smartphone. And then they will basically, if they are able to extract the contents of that device, then they may be able to read anything that is stored on the device, right? Like from messages to photos to communications with others. So one distinction to make is that for these forensic extraction devices, it is easier for them to extract the contents of a phone after it is first unlocked. And so there's one point where you can envision, okay, I'll bring my phone so that when I'm out of a contentious situation, I can then contact loved ones. I can then, contact others and meet up with people. And then there's the next stage, like, okay, I'll bring it with me and I'll have it unlocked. And well, even before that, I'll have it with me, but before it turned on, but before first unlock, then it will be communicating with cell phone towers, right? And so my location information can be derived from triangulation of cell phone tower signals. And then there is the next kind of step where, okay, I'm going to unlock that phone, enter the passcode, unlock that phone, and then it will have, it will be more extractable to these forensic devices, but it'll have it in airplane mode. And in this case, there are some ways you can kind of navigate a city without the use of online maps, and you won't be subject to, say, the data brokers that you're uploading to via your usage of apps that you use. So you can use something like Co-Maps, and Co-Maps is an offline maps tool, and you can turn on GPS for the purposes of using Co-Maps, and GPS is receive only, so you can derive your location, navigate a city, but not be delivering all that data up to the cloud. So there are a number of kind of stages you can think about, and risks that you assume by, first bringing your phone, then turning it on, entering your passcode, and then finally turning off airplane mode, and accessing those apps that might have, ads in them and be delivering your location data through real-time bidding. So that's, we know that the two primary ways that location data is delivered to the cloud are real-time bidding through advertisers, the advertising networks, and also through SDKs that are through a monetary or insight deal with the app, delivering that location data. And so yeah, that'll be, make your data available through tools like Weblock and to ICE. So there are a number of ways you can kind of limit, and then you can choose dynamically, okay, well, I need to get in contact with my friend now. I will turn off airplane mode, and then, contact out someone who is at a secure location, and then I'll turn it on again, and so there are ways to kind of make sure that you have the best protection that you can for a given situation.
I do want to highlight two things though, since Saira and Bill kind of touched on this, to kind of roll back a little bit. Device unlock is a really important part of this, especially since with if you're observing ICE or going to a protest, one of those things is planned and one of those things is not. So I think having a passcode on your phone is a really important first step that not everyone has enabled by default. And consider turning off biometric unlock, because I'll let the lawyers kind of discuss that, but it gets fuzzy, and there can be kind of issues there. And this sounds very basic, but know all your phone's features. So know how to lock your phone to require a passcode. There's a key combination you can do. Know how to turn on your camera without unlocking your device, so you can film immediately without unlocking your phone. Just little things like that kind of set yourself up for success, for if you run into one of these situations, you don't have to go through that threat modeling process. It just works properly, and you can kind of go and record.
Yeah, Saira, do you want to explain the biometrics versus passcode issue, which we have been fighting in EFF for a long time?
Yeah. So basically, and Cindy, please feel free to jump in here. But when it comes to your right against self-incrimination, your Fifth Amendment right, there is a whole body of law around when you are forced to disclose some information to law enforcement, right? And you are not supposed to be able to, you're supposed to be able to reserve the right to incriminate yourself. And so if, for instance, an officer says, give me your passcode, and you refuse to do so, that right is protected under the Fifth Amendment, and courts have upheld that right. It gets more fuzzy when it comes to an officer holding up, for instance, your fingerprint to a device, or your face print to a device, and whether that in and of itself is requiring of Fifth Amendment protections in the same way that disclosing your password is. And so that's why it's one of the reasons that we recommend, making sure that when you're involved in either recording during a protest or recording just generally while ICE is in your city, that you are trying to disable the biometric unlock on your devices, because it offers you more protection. And also, just as a practical matter, we've already talked about ICE and CBP not respecting the law. There's, besides the Constitution, actually having a practical impediment to them holding up the device to your face and unlocking it is exactly what you want in this situation.
Yep. And it may not protect you overall. I mean, one of the things that, they might, if you don't turn over your phone, they might seize it. If you won't open your phone, they might seize it, and they may not, you may have trouble getting it back. We're not saying any of this is foolproof, because when you have agencies that are not respecting the law, you have agencies that are not respecting the law. However, we have worked with and heard from a lot of people who, that's not 100% of the time. And so the more obstacles and the more you can hold them to the law and protecting the law, the chances are that this situation may stop, and you may be able to walk away. And you just don't know going in whether these are the, this is a situation in which they're going to violate every law and norm for you, or whether this is one where if you actually stand up and do your right and protect your rights, they will go on. And some of that can be who the people are in ICE and CBP, and some of that can be happenstance. If it's a chaotic situation, often they don't track down everything. So these are things we advise without a guarantee that they're going to completely work, but recognizing that for a lot of people, a lot of the time, they will work. But for some of these things, we need your help in pushing back on policies. Like it would be great if Congress wrote a law that said that there isn't a different, that forcing people to provide their biometrics is not okay, regardless of what the Fifth Amendment says about self-incrimination, which gets to be this kind of somewhat arcane set of things about the contents of your brain versus your physical things. Congress can fix this with a law. Same with the situations we talk about, ALPRs and FLOC. There's a lot of local community efforts right now to try to push back on some of these ALPRs and other massive surveillance tracking. These are all things that you can get involved in. Again, EFF is in San Francisco, so this is happening just down the road from us now in Mountain View and Santa Cruz, with the discovery about exactly how easy it is for ICE and CBP to get access to information from these cameras that were supposed to just be local, right? It was technically easy, and then it happened. And we're still getting to the bottom of all of that. But the way to stop it is for local communities to come and say that not here, not in our communities. Are there other things that you guys I want to get to some questions, but I wanted to just start with everybody maybe going around saying, what are the kinds of things that you see that people can do to help protect themselves in these situations that you might want to lift up?
Yeah, Thorin touched on it a little bit in the technical protections. I wanted to also highlight some of the really basic things you can do to kind of lock down your security. Apply those updates, apply security updates on your phone, because there's this cat and mouse game between the forensic extraction and spyware companies and the Apples and Googles of the world that are trying to make their product more secure. And if you apply those security updates, then it makes the latest round of exploits or security vulnerabilities that could get into your device not effective. It's not going to be able to do that, right? So apply those updates where available, and make sure, if you are particularly worried and you're kind of a particularly targeted person, then you might want to consider turning on things like lockdown mode for an iOS device. So it impedes usability a bit, but it makes it so that your device is as secure as possible. There's an equivalent for Android as well. Thorin, I'll let you take it away for more technical advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other one that I would really highlight is if you're going to use something like Signal to really to communicate with others, whether that's for planning, whatever, just take the time to learn how it works, learn what the kind of loopholes for accessing, information might be, and learn how to minimize annoyances in it. Let's say it can get very chaotic in a community organizing way if you have 50 threads happening, you're getting notifications all the time, but it has a lot of ways to kind of mute conversations. You can kind of Android, you get kind of folders, and just spend a little time with it. I've been talking to a lot of people over the last few weeks about just it's oh, Signal's cool, but it's so much, but you can kind of make it less distracting and make it actually useful so you actually get the kind of things that you want. There's a lot of good community guides and sorts of things out there too.
Yeah, and just for the record, because this goes around a lot, Signal itself as a technology is quite secure and has not been broken that we're aware of. But every single person who's in communication has access to the plain text of that communication with you. And what we're seeing in a lot of situations are infiltrations of Signal chats, and one person who's in a Signal chat ends up under detention, and access to their phone means they get access to the Signal chat. So security is never as simple as we would like it to be sometimes. But I want to make sure that people understand that from where we sit as people who watch this very closely, the technology itself is quite secure. But any technology that people are engaged in has points of leverage from those people being either turned or their devices being compromised that can end up compromising things. And one last note that I've heard a bunch of people say that I just wanted to throw out is, if the cops are doing an active investigation that you know about, do not get in the business of destroying the evidence, whether that's removing people from Signal's chats or destroying evidence. The obstruction of justice and destroying evidence is its own set of crimes. And sometimes people get a little cute, or at least cute may not be the right word, but they really want to help do these situations. But you can actually create more jeopardy for yourself and others by destroying evidence once you know the cops are investigating something. That's very different than having an ongoing effort to try to make your Signal chats disappear after 1 week or other sorts of things. Making those settings and other things, that's fine to do as a general matter. But once you know the police are investigating, the stakes change, and the legal jeopardy that you and others could be in changes. And recognizing that is something that I want to make sure that reinforce. It's something that kind of lawyers know intentionally, but sometimes other people who need that advice may not be intuitive to them. Saira, any last what people can do? And again, I think there's the technical side, which is great, but there's also the policy side and the legal side. And then we'll switch over to questions.
Yeah, like as I was saying before, I think that shedding light on what's happening is the only way that we're going to get out of this situation, right? What we have seen from people in Minnesota and across the country, people who are engaging in the right to record when they, even among really scary circumstances, is really what's been able to counter the narratives that we've heard from the federal government about people who are obstructing investigations or getting involved or whatever it is. And holding that right dear, I think, is really important. As you mentioned, Cindy, there are many points at which you can get involved locally. And I think one of the best ways to do that is around the ALPR work. We've seen so many cities recently in the past year drop their contracts with Flock because they've seen what a privacy nightmare the technology is and the kinds of liability it can open cities up to. And so I do want to plug that next week we are going to be having an event online as well around Flock. And so some of our experts will be on there as well as others that we partner with. So stay tuned for that, and that can get some of the gears moving for you about how to get involved locally. And then, when it comes to things like other surveillance technologies, we know that there are cities that are adopting surveillance technologies all around the country that ICE can potentially tap into, right? And so really fighting back against that. So not just the ALPRs, but other types of surveillance technologies as well. Really making sure that you're taking to task your local law enforcement about how are you cooperating with ICE, what are your relationships there, and trying to attack that. I will just plug that a lot of the work that I've done prior to coming to EFF was around sanctuary cities and protecting sanctuary cities. And so when we're looking at like 287G contracts, for instance, where the federal government is deputizing local law enforcement agencies to act as their arm, they call that a force multiplier, right? They only have so many ICE agents, which of course is growing now because of the budget. But when you're looking at how the locals are getting involved, the surveillance technology aspect of it is huge. And so attack where you can. And a lot of that is going to be at your local level.
Yep, absolutely. So the first question that we had was, is EFF or other organizations involved in litigation in Minnesota or elsewhere involving ICE or DHS that could impact the ongoing surge? EFF is not. There are organizations, and I'm sorry I don't have them at my fingertips. There's definitely litigation going on in Minnesota by Minnesota-based organizations to try to fight back against the surge. And we're seeing that work its way through the courts. EFF itself is involved in litigation in some of these questions around, well, we have a direct case against the Office of Personnel Management for violations of the Privacy Act. That's not directly related to the ICE, but it goes to the bigger question about not only is ICE and CBP sucking up information from commercial data brokers and the public, there's also an effort inside the government that they're calling breaking down data silos to try to connect all the information that the government already has. So using IRS agents to help ICE target people, IRS information to help ICE target people. We've just recently learned about Health and Human Services, Medicaid information being used to help target things. And so EFF has been very involved in lots of litigation across the country as an amicus curiae, filing briefs about the dangers of breaking down these data silos. And of course, that leads us back to companies like Palantir, which are developing technologies that help the government have one interface to rule them all, to access multiple pieces of government information. It raises some things that I want to raise here too, because we've been talking to right now to people as if from their position as protesters or observers or ordinary people. But we know that a lot of EFF memberships are people who work in technology companies, who are part of building some of these technologies or deploying those technologies. And another thing you could do is raise these concerns inside your company and help us get information outside of these companies in ways that keep you safe. And we're happy to help people navigate that. But really, you have more power than you think you do if you're inside one of these tech companies and making your voices heard inside about being uncomfortable, being a part of repression's little helper, a part of building these technologies is another thing that people can do. There are groups, No Tech for ICE and other groups that are engaged, but there's also just more directly inside your organization, figuring out the levers where you can make your voices heard. And I think this is something that tech workers sometimes feel very unempowered. And I really want to encourage you, talent is the most important thing for most of these companies. And having a robust internal dialogue about these kinds of things is an important thing we can do. We really urge, especially people who are working at organizations like Palantir, who are building these kinds of things, to raise these questions. A company that claims that they are committed to human rights and respecting civil liberties has put a stake in the ground about who they are in the world. And if they're acting inconsistently with that, which is something we are quite concerned about for Palantir and others right now, it's perfectly legitimate for people both outside and inside the organization to say, we've made these promises to the world about who we are as a company, and I'm worried we are not living up to them.
Just to add to that real quick, if you do want to take that next step and say submit documents to a news organization, a piece of software that I have worked on is called Secure Drop. It's maintained by a sister organization of EFF, Freedom of the Press Foundation. And many newsrooms have Secure Drop instances where you can submit documents to them anonymously. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yep. Whistleblowing is always a complicated thing to do, but there are some technical tools that can help people protect themselves a little more than they might otherwise be. But I really urge people who are thinking that to reach out and get counsel and let people help you do this well, because there are ways that you are more or less protective, and they may not be that intuitive. We're not the people who can help you do that, but we can get you to the people who can help you do that. The next question is, given that a lot of this is purchased or sold data, are there protections in place to prevent the reuse of this data for other purposes. Saira, you want to address that to begin with about kind of reuse of data collected from one purpose to another?
I mean, that is the fundamental privacy nightmare, right? Like that's exactly why we don't want the one interface to rule them all, because once you collect all of that information, the question is, how long are you retaining it for? What future purposes are you using it for? And in many of these scenarios, when ICE is collecting certain types of information, they're keeping it for 15 years or more. And so the question is like, why are you keeping it for that long? What are you eventually going to do with it? And as we've seen under this administration, oftentimes, we've heard for years, for instance, when it comes to the IRS, like all we want is we just want you to pay taxes. So just, give us your information. We're not going to pass it along. And then you see agreements taking place between DHS and the IRS to try to pass along that taxpayer information. It really is a fundamental betrayal of the public trust, and why we're fighting so hard to make sure that that data doesn't get into the hands of immigration enforcement so they can carry out their own activities that are completely unrelated to the IRS. So in terms of how people can protect themselves, I'll leave the data broker question to others who have been working on this for longer than I have. But it really is about making sure that organizations like EFF are here with our Doge lawsuit to protect your information. There are many others out there also fighting to protect your information, it is, like I said, just this is what we have been concerned about. This is why we have our system of laws and rule of law. And when that's not being followed, your data, your information, and how it can be used in the future is really at stake.
Yep, absolutely. This is one of the areas where we've seen the Trump administration really start to tear down some of the things that used to protect us. So the question about ICE data being handed over, IRS data being handed over to ICE is being litigated right now. There's one case in the DC circuit. There's a couple of other cases as well where EFF has participated as amicus. So, traditionally, yes, there were actually some pretty strong limitations on information collected for one purpose being used by another inside the government, inside the agencies. And this is one of the things that Trump issued an executive order saying he wanted to end. And we're seeing the administration take steps to end it. So there are leverage points there, both for us and for, we haven't talked about Congress to try to shore up and actually increase those kinds of protections that we had. Right now, most of this is falling to the courts, and we're working as hard as we can to try to help stop that. Final question, I'm told, is there a recommended website where people can track ICE, CBP, and or DHS immigration deployments? Bill, I don't know if there is a single recommended. I don't know that we have a recommendation, but Thorin or Bill, I want to double check on that.
Yeah, it's a very tricky, kind of signals intelligence question on how to verify that information, whether that information is reliable. And so I am not aware of a single source that can kind of track that in a way that doesn't kind of spread more fear and spread more paranoia. Which is kind of the tricky part, right? Like where we don't want to, just because we see a car that looks like other ICE vehicles, to say that something is happening over here and it's really not, because that just makes the situation worse,
Yeah, we've got problems on both sides, right? There's a problem getting good information so that people have the information they need, but there are also both intentional and unintentional misreportings that can cause a lot of damage. And right now, I don't think there's anybody in the perfect position to be able to tell the difference. However, as Saira notes, Saira, I'm going to pass to you, is we are working to try to get some clarity about what the government is doing to try to block these sites, like one called Ice Block, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, we don't know about exactly the deployments in terms of like where ICE is going next or anything like that. I think that there's people who are kind of keeping tabs on that, but I don't know if there's like publicly available information. But there since ICE has been out in various communities, people have been fighting back by doing things like developing apps where people can report where they see ICE, right, in their community, to for information gathering purposes, to let people know, so that people can go and record what's happening, right? It's that's all really important, and as we talked about, part of your First Amendment rights. And the government has responded by going to Apple and Google and saying, delist these apps that are about ICE sightings, or we will sue you. We will we'll find ways to intimidate you. And so we filed a Freedom of Information Act suit to try to get at information about how the government has been threatening these companies and how the companies have been responding. Because when it came to IceBlock, for instance, both Apple and Google folded and they delisted that app, even though it's a completely legal app to have up and is part of important information and news gathering purposes. And so we've seen this kind of job owning before. We're seeing it under this administration, and for an administration that touts its First Amendment credentials or whatever it is, we are seeing the suppression of speech over and over again on the ground, and we want to expose that and make sure that we as the public are aware of how private companies are being intimidated by the government to shut down the speech of others.
Yep. Thanks. Well, we're out of time. I could do this for a whole other hour or so, and we still wouldn't get to all of the questions and smart comments. Thank you all for participating and engaging. I especially want to thank Saira, Thorin, and Bill for joining us today and bringing your expertise. Thank you to everyone who contributed to the discussion in the chat and elsewhere, all the great questions, and everyone watching around the world. Digital rights begin with you. EFF has been a leader in privacy, free expression, and innovation for 35 years, and we do need your help to keep up the fight. As you can tell, we have a deep well of expertise inside this organization. That takes years to build, and that takes sustained support. And we really, really love and respect and honor all the people who give money so that we can stand strong and we can have people go as deep as this team, and this is just a small sampling, does in the details of how this works, and be able to help empower you to stand up and protect your own rights as well. So we need your help to keep up the fight. You can become a member today at EFF.org/stopice. And you can get these cool t-shirts that they just put together and other kinds of fun swag, because, this is a team sport. We're all in it together, and we might as well have fun and cool clothes along the way. Thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll see a lot of you next week when we really drill down and talk about Flock.